Welcome to the 128th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Amanda Kyle Williams, recorded at Thriller Fest in New York City in July. Amanda is the author of the Key Street crime novels set in Atlanta, Georgia. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Amanda Kyle Williams, the author of the thrillers The Stranger in the Room and The Stranger You Seek. We're recording this interview at Thriller Fest in New York City. Amanda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
It's great to be here.
Well, how would you describe your new novel, The Stranger in the Room?
Well, it's the second installment in the Key Street Stranger series. The series is set in the South, mainly in Atlanta, where my American Chinese protagonist grew up, was adopted by a white Southern family. So, in the first book, she mentions that she has the distinction of looking like what they still call a damn foreigner in most parts of Georgia and sounding like a hick everywhere else in the world. So, and next up in the series is Don't Talk to Strangers, out also by Random House in February.
Great. Well, what was the inspiration for your character and protagonist, Key Street?
My brother adopted my niece Anna from China when she was an infant, and I was up there one year for Thanksgiving. Anna was about 5 years old at the time, and she had grown up in rural. She had really learned her English in rural North Georgia, and she opened her mouth and sounded like Ellie Mae Clampett, and Key Street just leapt in my lap. But seriously, at that moment, actually on the way home, I started thinking about what it would be like to grow up looking different in the South. And I felt a little worried for her, to be honest, and that was how Key was born. I grew up with some differences. I grew up white and privileged, but I had a learning disability. I didn't learn to read until I was 23. So I had that, I kind of got that feeling of being a little outside the circle. And I think that helped me develop Key with the inspiration from my Southern Chinese niece, who's adorable, and is 11 now and is not at all impressed that the series is dedicated to her. She could care less. She's like, yeah, whatever.
Well, I'm curious. Outside of your niece that you just mentioned, have you, in the process of writing these two books in the series, have you actually interviewed any Chinese Americans who live in the South?
No. In fact, I haven't. I have some friends that have alternate ethnicities.
Right.
But no, I actually haven't seriously done any interviews.
Sure. Well, I'm curious. how much research, because you're writing crime and novels, how much research do you do for your novels? Tons.
And first of all, I don't want to write a technical manual, obviously.
Sure.
So I end up using about maybe 10% of the research I do. But I think the value of research is in not only being able to pepper your stories with something that's realistic, but it really gives you the confidence to write about a subject. So, when I decided to make the move to crime fiction, I took courses in criminal profiling and in practical homicide investigation. Before that, I was a private detective in Atlanta and a process server. So my character now is doing a lot of the jobs that I did back in the day, except people weren't slinging guns around when I did it.
Yeah. Well,
thank goodness.
You just mentioned it, but according to the bio on your website, you had a variety of jobs.
Many jobs.
Many jobs.
It's an example, really, of someone that couldn't hold a real job.
So what led you to writing? You just mentioned, which I had not known that you
that I'm
had this learning disability, but what led you out of those jobs to writing crime fiction?
It's hard to really understand why the writing bug hits you, but it definitely hit me. Like I said, I didn't read my first book till I was 23, and a few years after that, I started writing. I remember the moment. I was actually just sitting outside. I had a weekend off from one of those mini jobs I had, and a line came to mind, and I knew it was going to be the first line for a book, and it turned out to be. I wrote some small press books, 1989, 1990, 1991, and they weren't very good.
Right.
And
were those crime fiction, or was it more literary?
I would never be accused of being a literary writer.
Okay.
Actually, they were spy fiction.
Okay.
And like I said, they weren't great books, but it was a great experience for me to kind of learn how to produce a series. So when I came to this series, I kind of knew instinctively how much to give the reader on the second book and the third book, and how to pull in readers that hadn't started at number one. So it was a great experience. But why the writing bug hits you is there's still a big question mark. I don't know. I dove into it. I think because I started reading late in life, that I came to it with a kind of passion that I might not have if it had been easy for me, or if I had started reading as a kid. So when I started reading, I was so passionate about it, and just consumed with fiction, with the idea that people read for pleasure, because it had always been a war for me reading. I think that actually I think it's kind of served my writing well, even though doing read-throughs and editing is still hard for me, because you don't outgrow dyslexia, you just learn how to cope with it. But it's served me well. I think I've learned how to listen to people. As a kid, when you're not performing the way that your peers do in school, you copycat and you bluff, you do what you need to do to get by. And so I learned how to listen to my brilliant siblings who had a big vocabulary and were doing very well in school. God, I hated them. And so I think that's really served me well in being able to create authentic dialogue later. So, you take the hand you're dealt with and do the best you can with it.
Sure. So what has been the response to your novels in Atlanta since?
It's been fantastic. I have had so much local support from the newspaper there, from television there. It's a great place for me to sell books, and it's when you go out on tour, it's really brutal because maybe a few people will show up, maybe not, but in Atlanta I can really count on support. People love that the series is based in Atlanta. They love recognizing landmarks there. And it kind of makes it extra creepy for them because they're reading about crime scenes in areas they're really familiar with.
So obviously, I would take it that the city is kind of an inspiration to you, and
very much so. I'm passionate about the South, and I always knew I wanted to write about the South. And when it hit me that I could write crime and also write about the South, it was one of those aha moments for me. So. The city is very much a character in the books. And crime fiction has a long tradition of, place and setting. Look what James Lee Burke does and what Chandler did in L.A. It was Atlanta's kind of a natural for that. It's a gorgeous city with a history of, some violence there too.
Sure. So what is your writing process like? When you're working on a new novel, do you outline extensively, or are you more of an organic writer to kind of see where things go?
Well, I never outlined. When I wrote The Stranger You Seek, I wasn't working off an outline. I had this story in mind, and I just jumped in. Once you're under contract with one of the big traditional publishers, it's a different deal because they, part of my contract is that I submit an outline and get the idea approved before I write the book. So it's a different world for me now. I've had to learn how to outline. but I now see the benefits of that. It's kind of nice to have a roadmap. So now I write a first scene and a last scene. I title my books before I write them, and then I only have to worry about 120,000 words in between. So, no problem, right?
Yeah. So do you have a roadmap for the series at this point in your head or on paper?
I do. Yeah, it's not on paper, but I very much do know where I'm going. And in fact, I've already started the third book, Don't Talk to Strangers, will be out in February, and I've already started number 4, A Complete Stranger.
Great.
It's obviously there's stranger in the title of every book.
Yeah. So especially given your background and what we talked about in terms of dyslexia, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who may be listening who want to have their own novels or short stories published?
I think that the best probably the best advice is to just sit down and do it. I mean, there's no easy way. There's days I feel like I have to tie myself to the chair. Writers are kind of all over the place anyway. So sometimes just sitting and being still is the biggest challenge in writing. But that story's not going to get done and that book's not going to get finished if you don't really carve out a time and be committed to it and sit down and do it. And, as much as your family and friends tell you that they want you to do this and they're really supportive, when you pull away from them to do it, you'll find out that maybe they're not as supportive as you thought. So it takes a minute for everyone in your life to get used to. Writing's a very solitary thing, so you really have to be committed to making that time for yourself and just doing it. And you know what Hemingway said about first drafts? All first drafts are shit. They really are. And you have to give yourself permission, I think, to sit down and write crap for a little while,
right,
and let it flow. Try to silence that internal editor that slows you down, because you can fix it later. It's easier to get some framework down and go back the next day and work on it than it is to wake up to a blank page.
Sure. And how can people find more information about you online if they're interested and want to find out more about your series?
There is so much information for me about me online. It's a little staggering. AmandaKyleWilliams.com. All my books are up. There's a bio up, and the Random House website has my books, and there's a gazillion interviews out there now. Some of them good, some of them not so great.
Okay. This will be one of the good ones.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Amanda Kyle Williams, author of The Stranger in the Room, which is available in bookstores now, so grab a copy.
Yep.
Amanda, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.
You should be saving for the future, but savings accounts suck, and investing can be scary. We combine the ease of savings with the real returns of investing. We call it SaveVesting, and it's only available in our new app, Stairs. Stairs offers 4 to 6% returns, no fees, and you can withdraw anytime. Do your future a favor. Visit StairsApp.com today.